Thank you. So I assume that you're able to advise me on the government's overall budget spend in relation to women? Because I've tried to work it out and I just need a little bit of assistance in the shift from FAXIA to the new...
Do you mean the costs of staff and the program budget?
The program
yes,
budget.
We can help you with
yeah,
that.
thank you. So I've looked at the figures under the previous government when I understand all of the programs sat with FAXIA, and I've tried to compare that with what we've got now, and I think I've worked out that you've got DSS outcome 2.1, which retains the national plan, and everything else sits with PM&C under outcome 1.1. Looking at the figures, it appears to add up to about $60 million less than it used to be. Can you
no, I think
clarify that for me?
For the Department of Social Services and the Women's Safety program, or National Initiative program, I think it comes under, that funding has not changed in the budget, and I think it's around 104 million over the forward estimate period. In the PM&C Office for Women portfolio, we have the Women's Leadership and Development Fund. In the budget, that has been reduced by 10% in line with many other reductions to programs across government. It won't affect any existing funding agreements or contracts at all, and the money's there in the forward estimates for that program.
And that's not anywhere near a $60 million figure.
So I'm not...
Can you give me some... I mean, I'll follow up on that and I might put some questions on notice once I've had another look, but could you give me some table numbers? Because I've got page 29 of DSS.
I think, Senator, if you go to page 31 on the PM&C budget statements,
which sadly I don't...
It shows the Office for Women in that table. You need to read it in conjunction with budget paper number 2, which shows where the saving was made.
And that was that reduction to the national initiatives bucket that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's on page 188.
That's the Women's Leadership Development Strategy that sits within PM&C.
Okay, yep. And that was a $1.5 million decrease?
1.6 over 4 years.
1.6, okay.
Over 4, yeah.
But just bearing in mind, Senator Waters, as the officials have stated, it doesn't affect the current grants that have been made.
Sure.
They stay as per the grant.
Sure, yeah, it's just a reduction over
over the
full year. Yeah, got that, thank you. So is that the only reduction then?
Yes.
In funding?
Yes.
Okay, so the bucket which funds the national initiatives, including the National Action Plan,
yes,
has that been reduced?
No.
No, and that's in DSS.
And it is 104 million over the forward estimates under national. You'll see it under national initiatives in their portfolio budget statement. I think that program does include some small amounts of other funding in the order of 3 or 4 million. But the main part of that funding is the 104 million over the next 4 years for the...
Okay, good. Well, look, I might have another look at those figures and come back to you with some further questions on notice. But thank you for clearing that up. So the PBS says that your office is responsible for women's economic empowerment, women's leadership and status, and the prevention of violence against women. I'm just trying to work out how that fits with what I thought was DSS's retention of responsibility for the national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. So if you can just explain how you divvy up that work.
I think essentially the responsibility for the national plan and the second action plan sit within that portfolio. And the Minister may like to comment, but Minister Andrews is working with Minister Cash and asked her to lead that work. So that's why, as Ms Steele said earlier, we're working very closely with the Department of Social Services and other relevant departments. But they have the funding, they are doing a lot of the work on it, but the Minister is leading that work in terms of shaping the plan, working with stakeholders, etc.
Okay, so the office,
so it's
your
almost
office
a bit of a
isn't
joined
resourced
up
to do that work. That's DSS that has the resourcing, but you're collaborating. Okay.
Correct. And it's always been that way.
Yes.
The Office of Women and the National Action Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Children, or the safety, but they've never actually been joined.
Okay, thank you. Now,
Budget line?
the way the budget line is in the budget measures, it has the 1.6 over 4 years, but it goes 390, 395, 402, 370. Can you explain that variation in figures over the 4 years?
Where did you get the...
It's page 23, the budget measures of the budget
budget paper number 2?
No, it's the yellow one, which actually spells it out across the whole department. And in the white one, it's very neat and just goes 0.4, 0.4, 23.
23.
In the white paper, it just goes 0.4, 0.4, 0.4 there. But in this one, it's actually got this little quirky variation, and I just want to know why.
Administered expenses. That's a different one.
With our corporate services area, it looks in the first few years as though it's just the same amount being indexed. Right. And then I'm not completely clear why in 17, 18 it's a smaller amount. That's so right. We'd have to check that with our corporate area. So it would just be nice to know in terms of, the papers and how it adds up. Thank you.
And funding profiles are very often uneven across forward estimates. They're not often the
They're not in the
same.
other paper. They're very neat in the other one. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, pardon my ignorance, but can you just clarify for me the sort of nature of your office? Because I've got a list of the agencies that sit under PM&C, and clearly you're not an agency as such. Mm-hmm. How do you categorise yourself? Are you a branch of the department or...?
An office in the department.
Office. Are there any other offices, any other bodies with such status?
We've had a range, it depends on how far back you'd like to go, Senator. We've had a range of different units within the department, offices within the department.
Okay.
There used to be the Office of Indigenous Policy, so there's different titles at different times.
Okay. Is that
the Office
somehow
for Women, well, the Office for Women has always, or for as long as I can remember, has had an office for women or an office for the status of women, and so it's always been an office as long as I can remember.
Okay, and does that have a different status to an agency?
An agency is set up differently, but you can have units, offices which are actually still part of the department. An agency is normally a separate structure.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily demote you, it's just that you're internal rather than external.
Yeah,
that's right.
Some agencies are established by legislation and have,
Yeah, well, thank you. I did want to come to that. Do you have any statutory responsibilities or backing?
No.
Okay. And so do you have any statutory obligations to report on women's issues?
No, but we have obligations under international treaties to report to international bodies such as the UN.
Okay, on behalf of the Australian government.
That's correct, and and some of them are on behalf of state and territory governments too. So the CEDAW report is a comprehensive report on the status of women across Australia.
Okay, good. So could I just clarify, and I know Senator Moore went through this at the beginning, how many staff does the Office of Women currently have?
It's around 20 average full-time equivalents. And I say around because things move a little bit, particularly with people working part-time and who's on leave and who we bring in.
Okay, and is that steady over the forwards?
That's been steady,
And steady in the past as well as in the forwards?
Pardon?
Steady across the forward estimates?
We haven't yet finalised our internal budgets over the forward estimate, Senator. We'd normally do that towards the end of the financial year. We would finalise next year's budget, so that hasn't yet been finalised across the whole department.
Right, so you're anticipating that you'll need to make reductions?
So I think we have been talking about the impact of the efficiency dividend within our department and the need for savings across the department, and we've had some earlier discussions with the committee about the various processes we're going through to achieve that.
All right, so not too sure what that will equate to in terms of numbers just yet?
Overall for the department there will be reductions, but exactly how that applies in each area of the department we haven't completely finalised those budgets.
Great. All right, well, I'll come back to that next time then. And again, Senator Moore touched on this earlier. I'm interested in the office's role to advise on budget measures. We went across the Cabinet submission input, which sounds positive, that's good. In terms of the specific budget measures, were you asked to advise on the implications for women of the raft of what looks to me and to many of the women's groups to be disproportionate impacts on women as a result of quite a lot of the different budget measures? So I'll go through them individually, but just generally, was that something that you were asked to advise on prior to the budget being presented?
I think we've already stated for the record that PM&C does provide advice on all budget measures, and now that the Office for Women is in PM&C, they've been part of that process.
Okay, so were you specifically advising on the individual measures which have been identified by the groups as having the worst and most disproportionate impact on women, namely, the cuts to community legal centres, the co-payment for GP visits, the HECS interest rates, which of course will affect women once they take time off.
PM&C provide advice on all budget measures.
All of them. Were you requested to produce specific financial calculations of the effect on women in particular scenarios?
We don't normally reveal the nature of the advice that we give government, Senator.
All right, yes, I just thought I'd give it a go. Thank you. And can I just clarify, is this the first budget in over 30 years where we haven't had a women's budget statement?
I have to take that on notice, Senator.
Okay. Perhaps you could explain exactly what the document that was produced was referred to as a women's budget statement, and has had many and varied forms over a number of successive governments. What it basically morphed into, though, was a collation of policies post-budget that were put together. I had determined that that didn't necessarily benefit the Office for Women. And what we're looking at doing is basically just in terms of our policies delivering for women. But certainly there's not actually been a women's budget statement of such, if this is what you're actually talking about. It was a document, a little glossy brochure that was produced
after the
post
fact.
the budget.
And so again, why was that discontinued then, Assistant Minister?
Oh, because we see it's more beneficial to actually just produce policies that are tangible to benefiting women's lives.
I think, Senator, there had been feedback in the past that by the time people got the brochure, they were already aware of everything that was in the brochure because it had been published through other sources.
Was there discussion about publishing it earlier then, say contemporaneously with the budget, so that people could in fact look at the budget through the lens of how it would affect women rather than getting rid of it altogether?
There were a number of budget documents, for example, on health, education, social services, which covered some of those measures you talked about, and that were produced by Treasury. So the budget documents are produced by Treasury.
But I think as a general principle, I think the government has been producing fewer documents as part of operating more efficiently.
Okay, so did the Office of Women have an input into the decision to discontinue that post-budget collation of impacts of the budget on women?
We certainly had discussions, Senator.
Discussions, okay. And was the proposition that the women's budget statement be, rather than axed, brought forward and issued earlier, discussed?
We don't normally reveal the nature of the advice.
Ms. Goss, where did the feedback come that the women's budget statement was not effective? The statement was made by Ms. Cross. So
no, I didn't say it hadn't been effective. I said I think the feedback we'd had that
where did that feedback come from?
Most of the information that was in the statement had already been provided in other documents.
I got your answer. Where did the feedback come from?
I'd certainly had that feedback from other departments who'd been involved. I don't know whether...
Did it go out to the alliances or the women's communities to find out whether they found it useful?
We've had feedback over the years, Senator, from the sector. Right. As you're aware, the nature of the women's budget statement has changed quite dramatically over the years, from a large document very similar to this to...
That was a long time ago.
That's right, and a lot of women in the women's sector hark back to this as the, I guess, the model approach, and it's not been like that for some time. And producing a women's budget statement or document or glossy, whatever you want to call it, after the budget is delivered is becoming, I think, less and less relevant. And I've had feedback from members of the sector on that.
Okay. Follow up.
Just before you to Senator Waters, I'd ask if you have a final question before I go back to Senator Moore. And Senator Moore, Senator Mackenzie's asked for 5 minutes or thereabouts towards the end, so we're getting tight for time.
Thank
Senator
you.
Waters.
Just one final question. Can I ask how much savings were made by discontinuing the post-budget women's budget statement?
Oh, there would hardly be any savings, really.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking the price of a publication.
All right. Well, if you could just take on notice for
Yep.
us, perhaps the list of, as Senator Moore suggested, of feedback where folk have said that they found that was an unhelpful document. It'd be interesting to see if that's a widely held view.
We haven't got formal feedback in an evaluation sense. I mean, it's conversations that we've had or discussions with the sector. So that I don't know what I can produce in a concrete sort of fashion apart from my sort of perception of feedback from the sector.
Because I'll just draw, and sorry, Chair, this is my final question. I'll just draw your attention to the National Foundation, who've made it their introductory point in their critique of the budget that this has been the demise of the women's budget statement. So clearly it's of concern to key bodies in the movement.
Senator Waters, that's not a question, it's a statement.
That's fine, because that was some of the issues I was covering.
Yeah.
So
Okay, well, it's eating into the time. So
Thank you. That was my last question / statement.
Senator Moore.